You're listening to the She Lift Project podcast, a show dedicated to helping women achieve higher levels of success in the workplace. No matter where you are in your career, we want to help you grow. Now here's your host, Cynthia Kirkpatrick, a CPA, CFP, and Senior Financial Advisor at Moneta Group.
Welcome to another episode of the She Lift Project podcast. I'm Cynthia Kirkpatrick. Thanks for joining us today. I'm excited where this conversation is going to go. We have Sara Joern with us, and we're going to talk about your journey, obviously, but how you help people as a psychotherapist work through what they're going through. And I know so many of us are going through a lot of things that we talked about ahead of time, and so I can't wait to hear what I'm going to learn and what everybody else is going to learn from you today. Thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me.
When I looked through some of the things about you ahead of time, man, I underlined so much, and I don't want to lose it because I can't have notes when we go through this. So you talked about living life with as much authenticity and open-heartedness as possible, that you're working on your evolution. You have this desire to support other people in their evolution, their expansion. You believe that everyone deserves to feel seen, known, and loved, and that it's our birthright for all of that. That as a psychotherapist, you specialize in trauma, anxiety, social justice, relationship issues. A lot of that going on right now. That additionally, things that you mentioned, getting out of your head and into your heart, which is something I'm learning lately, and I'm sure many of us are trying to figure out. And through that, trying to trust, surrender, allow, and believe. So much to unpack as we go through that. I think starting with where you're at today and what you're doing. I mean, psychotherapist, when I think about therapy, there's so many different terms out there. Like, I'm a therapist, I'm a psychologist, what does it all mean? What does it mean to be a psychotherapist?
So I can start with just like therapist and counselor are interchangeable mainly. Like my professional license is LPC, licensed professional counselor. But I think a lot of people's lexicon uses therapist. And then it gets confusing when you bring in psychologists, psychiatrists, and all of those. So technically, a psychologist has a doctorate, a PhD or a PsyD, a doctorate in psychology. A psychiatrist is an MD who specializes in behavioral health. So they have a medical license and can prescribe medications.
Okay.
Does that sort of answer that?
I think so. Yeah. Doctorate versus MD.
Versus, and a counselor or therapist to have a counseling license, you have to have a master's degree.
Okay. And so then you are a counselor.
Yes.
Sounds like psychotherapist is a specialization.
Yeah. And I use the term psychotherapist just because it is more specific than therapists, because we have physical therapists and occupational therapists. And so psychotherapist speaks to the mental health aspect of it.
Okay. And part of your outline here talked about EMDR. Mm-hmm. So trauma, anxiety, social justice, relationship issues. I mean, all of us have those. We all have relationships. So there's going to be an issue somewhere. Mm-hmm. And related to that, being certified in EMDR. I mean, can you go into more of that, all of that, your day-to-day, who you're working with? What's it like?
Yes. I want to say one more thing about psychotherapist, why I like that term. Psyche is, I believe, Greek for the word soul. And so that brings the holistic aspect into it too, which I really like. Which I think comes from the parable of Psyche was, a goddess in Greek mythology, but I don't remember the whole story. So I'll leave that for another time.
Well, that's interesting because we think about, or maybe I shouldn't say I think about, therapy, think more about in the head, right? What you're thinking, what you're going through, what you're spinning on, anxiety, et cetera, et cetera. Yet, to me, the soul is deeper. It's below the neck.
It sure is. Yeah. And so I think that kind of segues into that question about what do I do and what does it look like? I think I have to rewind a little bit because my master's degree for counseling is in transpersonal counseling psychology. So transpersonal means it both includes and transcends the individual. So it looks at kind of the interconnectedness of all things. I was in a wilderness therapy program, so connection to nature, connection to a higher power, connection to that which is greater than us, and connection to each other, and connection to the self. So when I'm approaching therapy with people, it's very much what we call a depth psychology approach. So working with the mind, but also working with the heart and working with the spirit or the soul or whatever is like deeper, if that's something people believe in. That's part of my perspective. And so when I'm treating anxiety or depression or trauma, I take the depth psychology approach of really wanting to get at the root of the problem, not just treating the symptoms. So with anxiety, for example, if we're talking about agoraphobia, say, meaning somebody's afraid to leave their house, they don't want to go outside, the world seems like a really unsafe place. We can do all sorts of cognitive behavioral interventions to try and work with that phobia. And there's absolutely a time and a place for that. And I do that with clients, breathing techniques, grounding, relaxation. How do we get you to feel safe in your body? But I want to know where that phobia comes from. Most mental health issues, whatever it is, relationship issues, anxiety, trauma, depression, come from some sort of negative or adverse experience in our past. And that's where the EMDR can be really beautiful. That the difference between traditional talk therapy and EMDR is that traditional talk therapy is kind of what I was talking about, the superficial level of learning skills to manage the symptoms, whereas EMDR gets rid of the symptoms.
And what does EMDR stand for?
Great question. Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which is a mouthful.
Right.
Which is
no
why
wonder
we say
you just
EMDR.
go with EMDR.
Yep.
And what is that? I mean, eye movement, all of that. What is it actually doing?
So in a nutshell, it was developed in the early 90s by Frances Shapiro. And she found that lateral movement of the eyes, so simply moving from left to right, helps resolve and re-encode traumatic memories. So they call it bilateral stimulation. So the eyes moving back and forth alternately stimulate the left and right side of the brain. It can also be done using auditory tones, where the tones alternate in each ear, or you can have people holding buzzers that buzz alternately in each hand. But something about stimulating each side of the brain, it's like the traumatic memory gets recoded so that it doesn't erase the memory. You still remember it, but it doesn't have all of the triggers related to the memory.
So you're going through the memory, talking through it, thinking through it, and then somehow left to right through your body, having that stimuli, recoding it.
Yeah, it's kind of like magic. And I mean, it takes several sessions, and there's a lot of prep work we do for the EMDR and a lot of containment, because obviously when we're diving into traumas, we want to make sure that there are grounding skills in place, that people are able to regulate their emotions. But yeah, it works. When they do functional MRIs of the brain, there are certain parts that light up that are related to trauma. And so if you look at somebody's brain before EMDR, somebody who has, say, PTSD, and then once we call it clearing out each of the memories with the EMDR processing. And then if you look at an MRI, an fMRI, after EMDR, those spots on the brain, they're barely lit up. Like, it's barely perceptible because something has changed on a neurobiological level.
So this sounds like there would be like a great story here. Like, you seen somebody come in and the transformation, you know, obviously you can't share names or details, but anything stick out to you where you've seen somebody evolve, transform, that shocked you?
I mean, there are so many, but there's one client in particular that I'm thinking about, and she's such a badass. She's like, just always, she's got that sort of like, to the point, I'm here, I'm going to do this, let's like ride into the storm kind of attitude, which I think had served her well and was also a coping skill, right? That she had developed from a lot of childhood trauma. And so she came to me, the presenting problem was her and her sister wanting to work on their relationship with their mother, who's very abusive in a lot of ways. And I worked with this client for probably 5 years, and we worked through a lot with her parents, with mom, with dad, from the past, and then also what was showing up in the present. And she had this really fraught relationship with her mother, and it was kind of this, you know, back and forth, and I don't know why I keep doing this to myself, but she's my mom. And, you know, like, stuff with parents it's complicated, right? Because we have our ideal parent and then the reality of who our parent is and all of that. But through the EMDR process, you know, let me say that again. Doing EMDR processing for all of those childhood memories, it was just night and day. She made really strong boundaries with her mother. She started to see some of the same dynamics that were playing out with her sister. It like improved her self-esteem. It changed how she showed up in the world. It changed how she advocated for herself at work. So I think that's an example of how there are these things that seem really specific, that have this ripple effect and impact us in ways that we don't even realize.
Yeah, I can see that. You know, you don't know how maybe it's eroded at your confidence, or, you know, just your unease or lack of safety maybe out there, so that you're unwilling to set those boundaries because you're afraid of how you might harm some of those relationships at work or whichever.
Yeah. And what's cool about EMDR too is that stuff just kind of organically comes up. So I'm not leading it. We're just kind of letting the client's brain and nervous system lead it. Like, neither of us are in the driver's seat. And I'm thinking of another client where we were working on substance abuse issues. And we always know with addiction that the substance is a symptom of the problem, not the problem itself. But we don't always know what's at the core of it. And like with that one, it wasn't about, you know, wanting to get intoxicated on alcohol or wanting to party or whatever. It was about loneliness, and it was about wanting connection. And so sometimes the EMDR even brings to the surface like what is actually wanting and needing to be worked on at a deeper level.
So that's interesting to me, because I'm sitting here thinking, oh, well, they would know what's there, what's causing it. So that's what would be leading. But you're sitting here saying you don't know, the person doesn't know, and it's the EMDR that's bringing the issue to the forefront. Like, how does that work? How does that happen? Like, are they like are they sitting there holding two things, and they're going from, you know, left to right hand or whichever, and they're saying, okay, my issue is alcoholism now, EMDR, tell me what's going on here, and then it just happens?
So not quite like that, but kind of. And that's where I feel like it's magic, because the way that the EMDR processing works is we'll start the bilateral stimulation, whether that's the eye movement or the auditory tones or the tactile sensors. And we do a set of bilateral stimulation. Each set is about 1.5 minutes to 2 minutes long. And during that, we're both silent. And then I stop them, have them take a deep inhale, and then say, what's coming up now? And they just tell me what's happening for them, whether that's thoughts, emotions, or body sensations. And sometimes it links up to other memories. Because the way that things are categorized in the brain, it's kind of like a library, right? You have different sections for fiction, nonfiction, psychology, religion, history, all of that. And our brain files things away in similar ways. So when things are thematically related, oftentimes it will bubble up in EMDR. So with this particular client, the loneliness and the desire for connection went even deeper. It ended up linking back to memories of being bullied as a child. And so then we had new EMDR memories to add to our list for things to target. So sometimes it just fills out the clinical picture. Sometimes we do get that through intake. Sometimes people are aware that it's connected to that, but not always.
As somebody who is in their head a lot. I might have a husband in the corner who says all the time, always thinking, I'm thinking, it would be really hard to sit there and I would be like, oh, my brain's thinking that, like, to let go and just let my brain go so that the messages could come to us. And
that's a big thing that I am learning myself and have to teach people. But that goes back to my mantra of trust, surrender, allow, believe. In EMDR, we have the meta levels of surrendering control and trusting in the process. And it's an art, and it is something, it's a learning curve for a lot of people, especially perfectionists like myself.
I got you. We're seeing eye to eye there. And what's interesting to me, by the time we air this, I'll be 48. So I am, total hardcore Gen Xer. Grew up in that age of boomers raised me, get over it, be tough, really no emotions, and trying to unlearn a lot of that built in, cemented pathways and a lot of those shoved away emotions and things. And some of what you brought up there is, tapping into just kind of releasing, getting back into, relearning.
It's relearning and unlearning. There's so much unlearning because of the ways we've been conditioned, right? You talked about having boomer parents. That's a part of it. And then we also get it from different systems of oppression. Like, this is my liberation psychology sort of social justice lens. You're not crazy. You live in a world that's crazy, right? We have the patriarchy, we have white supremacy, we have capitalism, we have all of these systems of oppression that tell us that we're not enough and that we need to just work harder and that emotion is weakness and all of these internalized messages that we're born into this world. We don't have all of that conditioning. We grow up and then we spend 10 years in therapy trying to unlearn all of that conditioning.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I think a lot back to when we're born, we're so curious, we're so happy, and we're so proud of ourselves. We're so happy with ourselves. We love ourselves. And then the world teaches us shame, teaches us to not speak up, to not ask questions, to not have boundaries, to give to others, to almost lose ourselves, making everyone else happy.
Yes.
And then, for many of us as I mentioned, my age and whichever, we're now trying to throw all that away, unlearn it. And no blame to my parents. I mean, that was what the times were, right? And I think up until recently, that's trying to change. It's new, but we should all go back to those times when we were young and allow or try to get back to that, because that's the purity.
It really is. I mean, look at a 3-year-old dance. It's completely authentic. They don't care what anybody thinks. They don't care if they're moving with the rhythm of the music. They're just moving in a way that feels good to their body. And we've lost that. You know, you can take an authentic movement class and there's usually a whole arc of getting out of the head in order to get into the body, to get closer to that purity that you're talking about.
It's funny, over the weekend, my husband had pulled out a bunch of old pictures, and my son, he's over 1. I don't know if he was 2 yet, or he probably was. And he was in a wedding, my cousin's wedding, and he was, the ring bearer or whatever. And anyway, at the reception, and I remember this to this day, but there's a picture of him with his, the vest is off, the jacket's off, the little bow tie's off, and his shirt's out, untucked. And I remember he was dancing like a crazy man at that reception. He was having a blast. And guess what? Everyone around him at that reception was having so much fun watching him. Mm-hmm. And, you think about when you go to these events and you see people just letting loose, at least in my brain, I think, some of us initially are like, okay, they're a little crazy. But then when you sit back and watch, they're having a blast. And usually everybody around them's having a blast. And many people are thinking, gosh, I wish I could be like that. I wish I could let go and be like that.
Yes. Yeah. And that's the thing. It's like unapologetic permission to let ourselves show up authentically. And when we do that, we give other people permission to do so. We model that. And that's everything from dancing like a crazy person at a wedding to making boundaries, saying no to things that we don't want to do, and showing up for ourselves rather than who we think other people want us to be. As women especially, right? We're taught to be caretakers. We're taught to bend ourselves into pretzels and abandon ourselves constantly. And it's like, well, what would it mean for us to actually prioritize my wants and my needs?
And it's difficult because the words, I think, that are used to describe women in those situations are very different than the words used to describe men in those, assertive versus, bossy or the other B word.
Yep.
We may get into cursing by the end of this, and sometimes we do. I always try to start out cleaner. But the words, and again, I'm even sitting here worrying about saying curse words or whichever, because you have to have this presence about you, and you almost have to be so far on the clear of that line because potentially you're going to be judged and or how you might be described.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's something you said earlier, I think, with that woman and her mom, her parents. As I've gotten older, I've seen myself and others struggle with that parent-child relationship of boundaries. But you're supposed to you know where I'm going with this. Mm-hmm. You're supposed to take care of them. You're supposed to be there. You're supposed to do this or this as the child, especially sometimes as a daughter versus a son. I'm just going to stop there because
Yeah, I mean, and it's a tricky relational dynamic to navigate. I mean, relationships are already difficult to navigate, right? Because you're already starting with two people. And when there's another person involved, there's always a wild card because we can't control the other person as much as sometimes people might want to, right? That would make it a lot easier. And sometimes with family of origin, so meaning the family we were born into with our parents or our siblings, it can feel hard to control ourselves because we can regress so easily. Like Ram Dass says, oh, you think you're enlightened? Go spend a week with your family. And so we have it's different triggers, and it is a different relationship. So you were talking about parents and looking at desire versus obligation. These are themes I talk to clients a lot about in the context of interpersonal dynamics and relationships. And what would it mean if we did things out of desire instead of obligation? And at the same time, Are there expectations? I mean, this gets into family rules, like unspoken rules or unspoken or overt or covert expectations. So sometimes it's very direct, sometimes it's more subliminal. But this comes back to the authenticity piece, you know, like what actually feels good to me. A term that I borrowed from my former therapist that I use with people is the distance that maximizes the love. So with a parent, say we do feel an obligation to have a relationship with them, and there is probably also some desire there too. Sometimes we fall into these patterns with the shoulds, with the obligation, as women being the caretaker or the one who's supposed to keep everything together. Being like, oh, well, I talk with my mom on the phone every day, or I have to go see my parents 6 times a year, even though they live across the country or whatever it is, or I'm going to spend 2 weeks with them every time I visit. And then by day 4, people are emailing me being like, this is horrible. It all went to shit. We can. It all went to shit. It all crumbled. And so it's like, okay, so maybe 3 days is your max. You go for 3 days instead of 2 weeks. Or instead of calling your parents every day, maybe you call them once a week, right? And so it's kind of figuring out what works for us and what works for them. And sometimes there are differing desires. And so how do we navigate that? But what I tell people is, because they're like, I don't want to disappoint my family. Like, they're all expecting me to go to this family reunion. And Glennon Doyle, she's a beautiful author and feminist. She says it's more important to not disappoint yourself than it is to not disappoint somebody else. Because we get upset to the degree that we compromise our own terms. And so that's what builds resentment. And so it comes back to like quality over quantity. Would you rather have less communication with a parent or with anybody and have it be more nourishing and more loving, or have it be more frequent but less fulfilling for both of you?
I think you hit on a very important topic. It's something I've been hearing a lot lately, and we've had other guests on, how we treat ourselves, how we think about ourselves. And you've talked about it a bit throughout this conversation. You know, relationships with others are important, but often just maybe first and foremost, that relationship with ourselves.
Yeah.
So what is so difficult with, as you mentioned, like, don't disappoint ourselves, or loving ourselves, or having that good relationship with ourselves first?
Oh, that's a good question.
Probably a big one too. Sorry.
Well, and I think it depends on the person. And in general, it's really true. We even have these idioms in our cultural lexicon of like, we're our own worst enemy, or our own biggest critic. And that just seems to be true. It's like, I don't know if, I think part of it's conditioning, and part of it is also the way that our brains are hardwired. Because if you think from a survival evolutionary standpoint, we are trained, or the brain is trained to focus on the threat. And so back in the day, that threat was a lion or a saber-toothed tiger in the wild. And so we're not noticing the beautiful flowers and the sun shining and the nice things happening. We see the saber-toothed tiger stalking us in the brush. And so the way that that's sort of translated into contemporary times is, a lot of people have heard the statistic about if somebody puts you down, it takes 8 compliments to make up for that, to sort of bring you back to baseline. And I think that's part of what happens. So our brain attaches to the negative, because those shameful statements from society, a teacher, a parent, a sibling, whomever, they start to trigger our social survival skill. So when we talk about survival, like fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, we usually mean bodily harm, like a life or death situation. But we also have the social survival instinct of wanting to belong. Because think about back in those times with the saber-toothed tiger, if we were a part of a tribe, a group, a village, we had a much higher likelihood of surviving than if we were out on our own. And so that's still within us. And so when we feel like when we're being ostracized or somebody says something negative to us, it threatens our survival, quote unquote, so to speak. And so when we hear those things over and over again, we internalize them. And that's what we remember, because the brain thinks that by remembering those things, it will keep us safe. And most of us operate under a false assumption that shame is an effective motivator. So if I can criticize myself enough, if I can shame myself enough into being better, being more likable, being, fill in the blank with whatever it is we're striving for, then we think we can change. But Brené Brown's done a ton of research on shame, excuse me, and it is not an effective motivator at all.
And go more into the shame, or what should we do instead, or?
So ideally, it's self-compassion, right? Like unconditional love. Or Carl Rogers, who was a humanistic psychologist back in the day, I think 60s and 70s, he talked about something called unconditional positive regard. And I think a lot of us will feel this with, say, our pets. Like they love us unconditionally. Or I think a lot of parents feel it with children. I'm not a mother of human children, so I don't know, but I would be willing to guess, right? It's like no matter what your kids do, you still love them. And most of us are pretty good at extending that to other people, right? We can forgive other people for a transgression, but we won't forgive ourselves. It's this like personal exceptionalism. And I say this to clients all the time. I'm like, okay, so you think the other 8 billion people on the planet are worthy of forgiveness, but you're not. Like, no offense, but what makes you so special? Like, yes, we're all unique snowflakes and we're all special in our own ways, but like we do this thing. And so if we can start to learn to, I say ideally love ourselves, because sometimes that just feels so far away. And I know that from personal experience of having an excoriating inner critic that I worked with my therapist for years on, for over a decade on. And it really, like, it was psychedelic-assisted therapy that sort of like finally blew through that in a really big way. And it was also years of inner child work, like working with those young parts that hold a lot of the shame a lot of the time, and just giving ourselves grace. And from a Jungian perspective, so Carl Jung talks about integration, and we have these shadow parts that we've disowned. And that's where the shame comes in. We shame them. We want to lock those parts away. We don't want to acknowledge those pieces of ourselves. And when we ignore things, they actually don't tend to just dissolve and fade into the night. They get bigger, they get louder, they come out sideways. And so the idea of integration is, can we make a seat for all of our parts at the table? There's a book called Tea and Cake with Demons, and it's the idea of taking those parts of yourself that you've demonized and like welcoming them to the table, being like, yeah, what if we sit down and have tea together? What if we have a conversation? What does this part need? And most of the time, like, what do we need when we're going through a hard time, or we're criticizing ourselves, or we're grieving, or whatever it is? Like, we just need some love and attention.
And all of that should be done with somebody who can, an expert, somebody who has credentials, who can probably help you through that. Like, don't go get your demons out of Pandora's box on your own and try to work through it. Like, have a therapist. You're a therapist, and you have a therapist who's helped you. Mm-hmm. So probably not try to get your deepest, darkest demons out by yourself and do it on your own.
No. No, I would not recommend it. I mean, like, there are exercises and stuff you can do, but it's also helpful to have an objective perspective because we all have blind spots. And so having somebody else who knows you and can see patterns and is separated from it can be really, really supportive.
And that's a lot of the new things I've seen and heard lately is, the more you ignore something or try to throw it aside. I actually just saw something this morning. The universe is whispering to you, and it will keep whispering to you. And this has happened to me. And the whispers will be there, and it will get louder and louder. And I kind of joked when I reposted this. It was like, it will end up smacking you upside the head if you don't at some point address it. And I think that's the emotions. Again, it's acknowledge them. Don't stay in them forever. Don't feed into them, but you need to acknowledge them. And I think and you'll correct me here if there's anything else, what can I learn from this and grow from this and move beyond it? But if you never acknowledge then you can't, I guess, bring it in, keep it as part of you, but grow beyond.
Yeah, and I find that so much of my work with people and with myself, it's just making room for the emotions. It's not necessarily trying to get rid of them, right? Like, yes, we do need compartmentalization skills. Like, I'm currently grieving the loss of my dog. It's not appropriate for me to be going through that grief process while I'm sitting in session with a client. But there's a difference between compartmentalization and repression. Repression is long-term. We never look at it again. I lost my train of thought. Where was I going? You were talking about emotions. Oh, yeah. So with people, it's just creating space to feel the feelings without wallowing in them, but also without glossing over them. And not seeing them as weak or bad. We have this dichotomy of good and bad emotions, right? And so there's like joy and happiness and love and gratitude. And a lot of people actually do hit an upper limit of those because there's fear that the other shoe is going to drop. But then we have this column of quote unquote negative emotions like anger, sadness, grief, jealousy, shame, resentment, all of that. And it's like, they all have wisdom. They all have messages. And in terms of evolution, we developed them for a reason, right? The movie Inside Out does a great job of illustrating like the function of sadness. And so I think that's another way to connect with ourselves is through our emotions, because there's such an integral part of our subjective human experience.
You're right. I don't think I ever thought about it till just now that those feelings we have attached a negative and almost a shame, as you brought up earlier, like, oh, I'm feeling anger, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling mad, and I shouldn't be feeling that way because that's bad. Which then I feel worse for feeling that way.
Yeah, it's the snowball effect. We feel bad about feeling bad. I mean, that's the classic catch-22 of anxiety, right? Or people with panic disorder, they get anxious about being anxious and create the anxiety that they're wanting to avoid. And so same with emotions, like if we can engage with them in their purest form, then we can move through them. That it's this counterintuitive thing, right? But that in therapy, we have this catchphrase of feel it to heal it. And so many times we're like, no, I don't want to touch that. I'm afraid I'm going to get flooded. I don't want to go there. But the more that we push it away, again, the bigger it becomes, and it's going to come out sideways. It's kind of like a pressure cooker. And if you're keeping the lid on the pressure cooker, being like, I don't want it to explode, but you leave that lid on there for days, weeks, months, years at a time, what does it do? It eventually explodes, rather than letting a little bit of steam out bit by bit. And then it's more manageable.
as you mentioned, the whatever piece of it, and things I'm working on right now, trying to speak my feelings and what I'm thinking, that resentment builds up, that because you're just trying to put on a good face or, save it and make everyone else happy or whichever, everything is just building up. Mm-hmm. And why can't they see? Why can't they, and I feel like it then distances, while you're going through all that, it then distances yourself really from everybody else and probably from your true self too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Things can get really muddled and confusing internally.
Oh, you mentioned earlier though, and I've heard a lot more about this, and I think there's a lot more coming out, and I'm probably going to say this wrong, but psychedelic therapy, I said it wrong.
Psychedelic-Assisted Therapy.
There you go.
Yes.
And I think we've heard athletes and different things internationally, people working with this, people especially with trauma. Sounds like this is, maybe it's not new. Maybe it's just that we're hearing more about it in the therapy space.
I think it's both. I mean, if you're looking at ancient indigenous plant medicines, those are not new, right? They've been around for centuries, if not millennia. And I mean, so that's a big conversation in the psychedelic assisted therapy space, depending on what medicines we're talking about, with cultural appropriation and paying proper respect to the cultures that they're coming from, which is kind of like a whole other can of worms. But yeah, right now in the field of mental health, we're in what they're calling a psychedelic renaissance. And so there are states like Oregon and Colorado that had originally decriminalized psilocybin and now magic mushrooms. And now it's completely legal, and they have retreats, and you can go to a therapist and do a psychedelic assisted journey with them. And then there, at the federal level, there's ketamine. So ketamine has been approved by the FDA for use in trauma, depression, different mental health disorders. And there's still a lot of research to be done, but the research that has been done just speaks volumes in terms of like psilocybin, and I think ketamine too, for treatment-resistant depression. Like one psilocybin, what we call a macrodose, like so you're taking enough to feel the effects, versus a microdose, which is subperceptual. But a single macrodose of psilocybin resolves symptoms of depression, not entirely always, but like significant, there's a statistically significant reduction, and that lasts for at least 6 months, if not longer.
And again, this is not going out and playing, and just, this is in the right settings with the right help, with, taking this, approaching it in a very serious, I'm probably not using, again, the right words.
I think intentional. Yeah. It's not like, I think a lot of people think of like Timothy Leary, or even like the electric Kool-Aid acid test and things like that, and the Merry Pranksters. And it's taking LSD and dancing around and having a great time. And this is not that. Right. There's a lot of preparation work. There's a lot of intention setting. What are we going into this wanting to do? And then there's a lot of integration afterwards. So we have this expansive experience with the medicine, with the ketamine or with the psilocybin. And then what do we do with it? Right. Because we see that happen too, where people kind of expect the medicine to do the work. But with psilocybin, they say it's a non-specific amplifier. So meaning it will shine a light on what we might need to look at, but then it's up to us to put that into practice. So it's kind of like, I don't know why this is the metaphor that's coming to mind, but like the medicine, the psychedelics are helping you fill up the tank of your car. Like they're putting gas in the car, but you still have to get behind the wheel and take the journey, right? And so there's a ton of research too showing that when people have a psychedelic experience and have therapeutic support and integration afterwards and before, that you have much more significant results than if you're just doing it by yourself, or even doing it with a therapist but not having any pre or post work.
Right. It's not like going to a therapy session one time and saying, all right, I'm done. My job's done.
Exactly. Or we use the metaphor of the gym. You don't go to the gym once and expect to gain muscle.
Like I ate healthy one day. Why did I not lose 15 pounds?
Yeah, exactly.
And I know I've heard, there's WashU is studying this. They've got a group. I think like John Hopkins, there are some real quote unquote, but like for those out there, there are some real places that are taking this serious and really studying this and looking at, as you mentioned, there's lots of studies trying to figure out these effects.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's cool that it's not just this like fringe hippie kind of thing anymore. It's becoming more mainstream, and there will, as with anything, there will be a lot of bumps in the road, I'm sure. But I think a lot of us in the mental health community are really excited to see where it can go.
Yeah, especially if there's, other, prescribed pharmaceutical drugs that, one, not everybody can take, and two, whether they're addictive or they're just not healthy, then where do you go from there? It'd be great if there was another option. And so it sounds like that's what they're studying and looking for. And it might be.
Yeah.
So talking about everything you're doing, and it sounds like, you're clearly making significant help and a difference for people. But I don't believe you were, little Sara, hey, I'm going to be this psychotherapist and EMDR when I grow up. How did we get here?
That is a good question. So little Sara wanted to be a marine biologist because she wanted to swim with dolphins all the time. And then she realized that's not what marine biologists really do. And then wanted to be a veterinarian. Like I was very drawn towards some sort of helping profession. And I really loved animals. And I went the whole route. I mean, biology, AP biology. I took Latin because there's so much biology in veterinary school. And I was even pre-med when I went to undergrad, in order to get into vet school. Like that was my plan. And then I was like, I don't think I can do 4 years of biology and organic chemistry and all of this. And I had always loved psychology, absolutely loved it. And so I was like, okay, maybe I'll major in psychology and see what happens. And I was actually part of this, I fell into, these are the like synchronicities, or you talked about the universe whispering earlier, and I think we get these universal nudges. And in hindsight, I can see so many of them on my path. But I was part of the Johnston Center for Integrative Studies as part of the University of Redlands, where you create your own major. And so I was very interested in, like I said, animals and the environment, and have always, even if I didn't have the words for it, been like a seeker, in terms of my own growth, my own evolution, learning about myself, learning about other people. And so I was trying to figure out what I wanted to study along with psychology, and I worked in the mailroom at the time. And there was a postcard marketing thing from Naropa University for eco-psychology. And I was like, I don't know what that is. I'm going to go Google this. And I went back to my dorm room, and it was sort of this marriage of environmental studies and psychology. And so I looked at their grad programs. Eco-psychology didn't prepare you to be a therapist, but they had a wilderness therapy program that did. That was the track for the LPC, my current licensure as a licensed professional counselor. So I ended up going to the wilderness therapy program at Naropa. I didn't graduate from the wilderness therapy program. I switched tracks to just the counseling track. But yeah, it was just kind of like, this is my passion. This is something that I really believe in for myself and for other people. And along the way, so many people said, like, you're so insightful. You make these connections that other people don't see. You're really easy to talk to. And I was like, okay, like maybe this could be a thing. And here we are 15 years later, and I love it. Like, I feel so grateful. I mean, I went straight from undergrad to grad school. So I was like 22, 23 when I started grad school. And most of my cohort members were much older, like 30s, 40s, 50s, because they had done a different career. And then switched to therapy, decided to follow their passions. And I just kind of fell into it. And I don't know if it's what I'll do forever, but I can definitely see myself doing it for the foreseeable future because I love it.
Okay, so the ecotherapy program, like, I don't know if anybody else who's listening to this will be like, okay, like a day in the life of, like, what does that mean? Are you literally out in the woods sitting on the grass on a blanket, or what? Like, describe a day, because I gotta know what this is.
Yeah. And I mean, it's anything from that to the outward bound programs, right? There's a reason that a lot of rehabilitation programs for teens or even adults are wilderness based. And there's so much metaphor. There are so many sort of meta lessons, right? Like, let's say backpacking, for example. If you're on a backpacking trip, you learn self-sufficiency, right? You're carrying your food, your shelter, your water, everything you need on your back. That builds confidence, that builds self-efficacy. You have to work with other people. It builds teamwork. I know they use, like, rock climbing was specific to addictions, right? So how can you trust yourself to make the next move? How do you approach situations when they're hard? How do you push through them? How do you persevere? So there's all of these things kind of like woven into the fabric of it. And so wilderness therapy or eco-psychology sees the environment as both a tool and a context for change. And so that's sort of like the more extreme immersion version of it. But even for my clients, I'll give them homework of go for a walk 3 times a week. Go walk outside your door and feel the sun on your face. There's so much research that shows how beneficial even just having houseplants is for our mood. The sound of running water, nature scenery. Even looking at a computer screen of a landscape has the effect of boosting our mood. Not as much as actually looking at a real landscape, but there's just so much richness there. You know, there are psychiatrists who, instead of writing a prescription for Zoloft, are writing prescriptions for people to go on hikes, because it's so significant for managing things like depression.
So for people out there who, you know, may or may not be, you know, seeing a therapist, may or may not think that they need to or are at that stage, some of the things that they could be doing to help with stress or whichever in their lives, being out in nature, walking. What else? Anything?
Bare feet on the grass. You know, we talk a lot about grounding skills. That's the ground, the literal ground. Touching trees, it helps not only discharge static electricity from our body, which can make things kind of wonky, but we're connecting to the earth. And that's part of that transpersonal view, right? Nature is something I'm something both a part of and something that is greater than me, right? Like if you've ever stood at the top of a mountain and looked out over a mountain range, there's this exhilarating feeling of like, I don't necessarily like the word powerful, but feeling empowered. Let's say, I used to live in Colorado. People climb 14ers. Like, it feels really good to climb 14,000 feet and have that sense of accomplishment. And so you have this like boost in confidence while also looking out over the Rocky Mountain range. You feel pretty small and insignificant, and not in a bad way, but just being like, oh, like there's so much more out there. And I think that can help us kind of get out of our ego and out of our like narrow view of things, which keeps a lot of us stuck too. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I think a lot of people hear about that military person who said, make your bed in the morning because you'll feel accomplished. You'll feel like you've already succeeded, done something good in the day, and so you'll feel like you can accomplish more. For me, I run every morning, and if on the rare occasion that I can't because it's thunder or lightning, whatever, I'll do it when I get home from work, which I hate because I love getting it done in the morning. I love being by myself. There's rarely not a lot of people out there at 6 a.m, and the fresh air and hearing the nature and the physicality of it. And it feels good. It feels good to have that little bit accomplished, but also knowing it doesn't really matter in the whole grand scheme of everything in life. Like, me running doesn't really matter. So I think I get it. Like, feels good, but it also doesn't matter. I think I did a post one time, everything matters and also nothing matters.
Yes. Yes. And that's the crux of so much of it. It's both and, right? How can I love myself and accept myself for who I am in this moment and still strive towards change? Like, I accept the self in this moment, and I still want to do better. Everything matters, nothing matters. Because that's part of, I think, where we get stuck in our heads, because we want to see everything as black and white or as a dichotomy, either or, good, bad, right, wrong. And that's just not the way of it. That's not the way of the world. That's not who we are as humans. And so if we can look at the middle ground, and not even a third way, but a fourth way, a fifth way, like thinking outside the box and just completely leaving the box behind. Can the box not even be a part of the conversation? Which is really beautiful and really hard, right? You and I were talking about grief before we got on here. And I think that's a great example of a both and. When we're grieving somebody that we loved or a being that we loved, the love is so great and the loss is so great, and those things exist simultaneously.
Yeah, that conversation was for those who love deep, love big, that they're going to grieve deep and big. And I think we were both saying, at least for me, I think I feel every emotion big. If I'm hurt, I'm going to hurt big. If I'm mad or angry or, whichever it is, sad, all of those I am big on. Yet, there was something earlier this month that happened, and it hurt big. On the flip side, I knew, though, I said, I know this hurts big because I know I feel big and I love big, and I don't want to change loving big.
Yes.
I want to live that life that way, because 8 times out of 10, I can live that way and be safe and happy. And I don't want to give that up, because that's me.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a wonderful part of the human experience. I'm a deep feeler. I'm a crier. I cry a lot. And I used to see that as bad. I had the value judgment. And now I'm like, it's an emotion and it's cathartic and it's wonderful. Even when somebody says, how are you? We do that perfunctory, how are you? How's it going? And it's usually good, fine, not so good. And what I've been thinking about lately, I'm moving through this huge grief process, and there's also so many fantastic things happening in a day. And so if somebody says, how are you? I'm like, I'm human. I'm here. I'm having a human experience. Life is hard. Life is beautiful. It's all of the things. And that's just the reality. And so the less we resist reality, the more in alignment we become.
Yeah, that's always a tough question because I feel like I am an open book, typically, probably more so than most people want, but I just want to live openly and honestly. And sometimes if I'm going through something tough or I'm tired, I just say it. I'm sure people are just asking that, how are you? Because that's the nice thing to do. But I'll often just be like, oh man, I'm tired. I got to bed late. I've been, whichever. Or if things are great, oh, things are good. My kid or, whichever. We had a great night. Maybe that's just how I answer.
But I think that's beautiful. This circles back to what we were talking about at the beginning of unapologetic authenticity. And so if somebody says, how are you? Instead of it having become this just sort of greeting, it's almost like hello. It's like, okay, if you're going to ask me that question, I am going to answer it honestly. I wish more people did that because that's a small way that we're just showing up how we are in the moment and connecting with other humans. That's another thing I work with people on in terms of relationships because vulnerability is scary. It's a risk, right? We're opening our heart to another person. And that can feel terrifying, especially if we have traumas from that not being safe. And even if we don't, it's scary. And at the same time, this is another both and. Vulnerability is terrifying, and vulnerability also breeds connection. That's part of how we connect to other people.
Yeah, I think that vulnerability can give you some of the best experiences and best relationships in life. And there are going to be people that take advantage of that or, bring in potentially the negative into that because you have opened so wide. I tell my youngest this because she is just such a big light and a big heart. And it's like, I don't want you to change that. Know going in that it is going to open you to so many amazing things. And yeah, there are going to be times where you're hurt and you're hurt big. The positives are so worth it.
Absolutely. And what if we stopped trying to keep ourselves emotionally safe, which sounds kind of silly. But Elizabeth Gilbert talks about this. It's sort of the not living every day like it's your last, but we come into this life as humans with higher consciousness. We know that we will die one day. We know that this ends. We don't have forever. And yet we're so risk averse. We make all these decisions as though we have infinite lifetimes to do things. And to not put ourselves out there, we just keep playing small. And sure, we might keep ourselves safe, but what else, what connections, what beauty, what joy, and what happiness do we miss out on? And so what if Liz Gilbert says, if we stopped making safety the goal, what's beyond that? What does that open up? Like, it's open-heartedness, it's love, it's connection, it's risk. And again, I'm not invalidating the fear that's behind that, but we talk about fear of getting hurt. I talk to clients and friends and everybody about this in terms of romantic relationships. Well, I don't want to date. I hate dating because what if they break up with me? Or what if I don't want to hurt somebody else or whatever? And it's just like, well, think about it this way. If partnership is something you desire, you get hurt either way. If the relationship ends, it hurts. But if you're with somebody for 10, 20, 30 years, there's hurt there too. You're going to hurt each other. You're going to disappoint each other. So it's like we're playing this game where we think we can cheat getting hurt, but unless you live in a bubble and don't have any connections with anybody else, it's kind of an impossible goal.
Well, and I guess, and you're going to hurt there too, because what are you missing out on?
Exactly. Yep. So there's no way to avoid the hurt.
So we're going to get hurt no matter what we do. So might as well live open, freely, our hearts out there. So if we're going to get hurt, we're at least going to experience the big love and the big joy.
Yeah. Exactly.
While we're getting hurt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was going through like a deep, big transformative experience once. And I mean, just like sobbing, you know, those gut wrenching from the depths of your soul kind of tears. And it just felt all consuming. But the mantra that just kept coming up on repeat was, I would rather feel, I would rather feel, I would rather feel. Like I would rather move through the world with an open heart and get hurt over and over again, have to grieve over and over again, have to clean up my own messes when I step in it over and over again, than play it safe and be on my deathbed with a bunch of regrets.
Well, you know, I've read this and I do feel this, that sometimes my biggest learning moments and transformations have been from the hardest moments in my life.
Yeah. I'm going to cuss again, but there's a saying.
Let's do it.
In the therapy world, shit makes great fertilizer. And it does. And I think it's from Buddhism, they call it the fertile void. Like out of that darkness, out of the nothingness, out of the depths of our despair, it's the dark night of the soul is where a lot of the deepest transformation happens. That's where we learn, that's where we grow, like in the face of adversity.
And I would imagine as a therapist that also helps you become a better therapist.
Yeah. I mean, I've had a lot of training, obviously, with graduate school and then continuing education and all of that. And I really think my own commitment to continuing to grow and evolve and seek truth, whatever that is, has made me more of the therapist I am today, than any of the sort of didactic academic type things. That's important. There's absolutely like a necessity for that. But it goes back to the like living from the heart instead of the head. I used to be so head-centered. I always thought I would get my doctorate and get my PhD and teach and all of these things. And I don't know, maybe that'll happen one day. But I had so many people, mentors and supervisors and advisors along the way be like, yeah, you're so intelligent. That's what you'll do. Like, you'll just do this. And so I had that in my head and have realized that like intellect was something that I hid behind. It was how I stayed safe. It was how I felt loved in my family. And realizing, okay, what happens if I actually let that fall away? If I stop living from my head and don't need the PhD to prove to myself that I'm worthy, to prove to myself that I'm lovable, and actually get into more of the heart-centered work, the one-on-one with people, therapy, authenticity, vulnerability. And like that has opened up so much more for me than any degree ever could have.
Your comments there of worthy, that I am actually lovable. I think so many people struggle with that. That, as you mentioned, the degrees, if I get the house and the car or this promotion or whatever it might be, which really then once they get it, it's like, okay, well, if I get the next thing, then I'll be worthy, then I'll be lovable.
The if-then fallacy. Then I'll be worthy and lovable, and then I'll be happy, right? When I get the promotion, then I'll be happy. When I get the car, then I'll be happy. And so then we're always outsourcing our happiness to the future. Then what do we have in the present? Just aching and longing for what we don't have. And not to say, you know, I'm not dismissing that having certain like basic needs met is important for well-being. But when we're always chasing the next thing, we miss the here and now, which is why gratitude is another intensely transformative practice. Not how can I get all these things that I don't have, but how can I be happy and content and overjoyed at the things that I do.
So much of a like mic drop right there and everything you just said. And before you even just brought that mic drop, I was thinking, as you mentioned, getting out of the head and into the heart. And I've been working a lot on that, you know, these past few years, because that's where so much of my value has been. And I'm a head thinker. How can people work, if they want to get out of the head and into the heart? What are some things that they can do?
See a therapist.
I know a good one.
One of the things, a few things that have helped me. One is curiosity. And it's just like these themes. It's squishy, which I know isn't probably what people want to hear. We want to have these like, this is step 1 and this is step 2 and this is step 3. And it's not necessarily that linear, because progress and growth aren't linear anyway. I like to think of them as spiralic. Like we're evolving and growing outward, but we're coming back to similar lessons in different iterations again and again. But a lot of it, it's like, it's the gentleness. Because I know for me that the rigidity of, okay, Sarah, get out of your head and into your body, get out of your head and into your body. And it just became another sort of like militaristic thing and another way I was being run by my inner critic. And so I had to learn to soften that and use curiosity, like, I wonder what's happening down in my heart. I wonder what's happening in my body. Let's get curious. And the therapist that I've spoken about that I worked with for over a decade, she was a somatic therapist. And so one of the best ways to get into the body is through physical sensation. And so it can be starting out really basic, like guided meditations of body scans. Right now in this moment, like I can feel the chair against my back. I can feel I'm sweating a little bit. The armpits of my dress might be a little bit wet. I can feel my foot on the floor. I can feel one knee crossed over the other. And the beauty of the body sensations, I mean, there's so much therapeutic value there because one, it helps us start to connect. We start to build a bridge between the brain and the body, or the brain and the heart, when so much of us have been walking around as kind of just a head, right? Sort of cut off from the neck. So it gets us reacquainted with ourselves. And also that's how emotions show up. Emotions are, even if you think about the word emotion, it's energy in motion. How do you know that you're anxious? How do you know that you're sad? Well, it's because it's an associated feeling in the body, right? It's not a thought. I can say I am sad right now and not feel the emotion of sadness. It's a physical somatic experience. And so it connects us to our emotions while seemingly contradictorily giving us space from them. So when a client is scared of touching into an emotion, I don't say, okay, let's sit in your fear. It's like, all right, what's happening in your body right now? Well, there's tightness in my stomach, or there's like a fizziness in my chest, or I can feel tension in my shoulders. And it's like, okay, breathe into that, feel into that. And for a lot of people, myself included, breathing into tension in my shoulders feels a lot more accessible than sitting with my fear.
Things I've tried to do, something you mentioned, you know, even just whether it's getting outside, feeling the ground, gratitude, ways to, in the body, what you're talking about there, those could be some ways beyond working with a therapist of trying to get out of the go, go, go and more into the present and the now, and that just, again, not thinking about the future, thinking about the beauty of now.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of power. I mean, Eckhart Tolle wrote that book, The Power of Now, right? One other thought I had too, it's like we're so used to operating in the mental realm, anything that can get us out of that. So like an example would be, instead of a journaling prompt, like how am I feeling today, or what emotion is asking to be felt, can you journal without words? Can it be a symbol or a color, right? That it's just one other subtle way to get us out of that really cognitive, cerebral space that most of us occupy on a day-to-day basis.
And I'm sitting here thinking to myself, okay, Cynthia, you know, whatever you're going to start doing, you're not going to, if you start tomorrow, this is not a one and done and you're perfect at it. Like, you got to remind yourself, you're going to have to practice at this. So you're going to have to let go, stop overthinking this right now. And it's going to take you a while to get out of your head and get, good at this and practice it. So for those out there, let yourself have some time with whatever you decide to do.
Yes, that's part of the gentleness too, right? And giving yourself grace. And I don't think perfect exists. Maybe in the mathematical world, like a perfect circle. But as humans, if we're always striving for perfection, we're setting ourselves up for failure. Progress, not perfection. Approximation, not perfection. If you even thought about doing the new thing but didn't do it, that's progress.
All right, I'm already on the right track. I've already started in the win column today because I've thought about it.
Mm-hmm.
What I love, and I think about, you talked about your working on your growth, etc. And, who doesn't want to work with somebody who's also working on their own growth? And, if I were working with a therapist, that's who I'd want to work with. My husband and I, we're working together on our own growth. Those are the people I want to be around. That's my poor way of trying to segue into what you're doing, where you're at, who you work with, because you're not just working with, kids or everyone. You are working with probably specific people, helping them.
Yes. So I started my private practice 6-ish years ago in Colorado. I was based in Denver. So I'm licensed in Colorado, and a lot of my clients are still there. And I see them virtually here. I am also licensed in Missouri. And I'm working on building my caseload in St. Louis. I would really like to be meeting with people in person again at some point. And I work with adults, so 18 and up. Right now, it's only individuals. At some point, I may be opening that up to couples as well. But that's those are the guardrails sort of in terms of the demographics that I work with. And again, specializing in anxiety, which is a broad umbrella. That's everything from like panic attacks to dreading going to work to specific phobias and what have you. And trauma. So that's also very wide reaching, classic PTSD, veterans, first responders, trauma from childhood. I do a lot of childhood trauma work with people. That could be a toxic workplace. I mean, there's so many different ways that it shows up. And what we call big T or single event traumas, like a horrific car crash, or little T traumas, which are sort of those things that for a lot of us happened in childhood just sort of over and over, that wasn't one big glaring thing, and that to our adult minds might not seem like a big deal, but altered the way that we see the world and other people and ourselves. And EMDR, that's what's cool. It was originally developed for the treatment of trauma, but They have seen that it's effective for things like OCD, depression, anxiety, phobias, all sorts of different things. And then, the relationship piece. And so that can mean relationships with other people, platonic friendships, romantic relationships, familial relationships and family dynamics, and our relationship with ourselves.
So how does one find you?
You can go to wildsagecounseling.com. That's my website. And if you want to compare and contrast me with other therapists, the best therapist directory to go to is Psychology Today.
I didn't know that exists. That's a great tool and resource. Thanks for sharing that too.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming today. I had high hopes because I knew I would learn so much just from my life. So I've talked to so many women and other people, and I knew what you would share would speak to a lot of people. And it was even greater than my expectations. And knowing you as a friend, this was just what a just heart-filling, soul-filling, fun time. And so thank you so much for being vulnerable, open, and sharing your wisdom. It was a great time.
It was really, really my honor and my pleasure. Thank you so much. Deep, deep gratitude.
This concludes another episode of the She Lift Project podcast. To hear more episodes of the show, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And to learn more about our mission of helping women reach higher levels of success, visit sheliftproject.com and sign up to receive the latest news, ebooks, videos, and more.